Axiology emerges from the Greek terms axios, meaning worth, and logos, denoting systematic study. This philosophical discipline investigates the fundamental nature of value itself, examining what makes something valuable, good, or beautiful, and exploring how these determinations shape both individual experience and collective social organization. The field addresses questions that extend far beyond academic philosophy, influencing the moral reasoning that guides our daily decisions, the aesthetic judgments that inform our cultural preferences, and the political principles that structure our societies. The central axiological question, what is valuable, has engaged philosophers across diverse cultural traditions and historical periods. From Aristotle's analysis of human flourishing in ancient Greece to contemporary debates about digital ethics and environmental responsibility, thinkers have sought to understand the nature of worth and its role in human life. This inquiry remains vital because value questions are inescapable features of human existence. Every choice we make reflects implicit assumptions about what matters. Every policy embodies specific priorities, and every life demonstrates particular commitments about ultimate significance. Axiology traditionally divides into two interconnected branches that, while analytically distinct, remain deeply intertwined in practice. Ethics examines moral value, addressing fundamental questions about right and wrong, justice and injustice, virtue and vice. This branch investigates the principles that should guide human action, the standards by which we evaluate moral behavior, and the foundations of our obligations to others. Aesthetics explores value in beauty, art, and aesthetic experience more broadly. It considers what makes objects or experiences beautiful, how we appreciate artistic works, the relationship between form and content in aesthetic judgment, and the connections between aesthetic and moral values. The interconnection between these branches reveals itself in numerous ways. Our moral convictions often influence aesthetic judgments. We may find it difficult to appreciate art created by those whose values we deplore. Conversely, experiences of beauty frequently shape ethical perspectives, as encounters with natural splendor or artistic excellence can inspire moral reflection and commitment. This reciprocal influence makes axiology a unified field despite its internal divisions, suggesting that human valuation involves integrated responses that resist sharp compartmentalization. The philosophical investigation of value has ancient roots that extend across multiple cultural traditions, each contributing distinctive insights to our contemporary understanding. In the Greek philosophical tradition, value theory emerged from broader inquiries into ethics, politics, and metaphysics. Plato's Republic presented a systematic account of justice that connected individual virtue to social organization, while his theory of forms posited eternal standards of beauty, truth, and goodness that transcend the material world. This metaphysical framework suggested that values possess objective reality, independent of human opinion or cultural variation. Aristotle developed these insights in different directions, emphasizing the practical dimensions of ethical life in his Nicomachean Ethics. His concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or human flourishing, provided a framework for understanding value in terms of human excellence and the realization of our distinctive capacities. Aristotelian virtue ethics focused on character development rather than abstract principles, arguing that ethical value emerges through the cultivation of excellences that enable individuals and communities to thrive. Chinese philosophical traditions contributed equally significant perspectives on value, particularly through Confucian thought. Confucius and his followers emphasized moral values like benevolence, ren, and righteousness, joyai, as essential for social harmony and personal cultivation. The Confucian approach viewed ethical development as fundamental to human nature itself, arguing that moral values are not external impositions but expressions of our deepest humanity. This tradition emphasized the social dimensions of ethical life, suggesting that individual virtue cannot be separated from communal flourishing. Indian philosophical traditions explored value through complex analyses of duty, liberation, and spiritual development. Buddhist thought examined the relationship between ethical action and the elimination of suffering, while Hindu traditions develop sophisticated accounts of dharma as righteous duty that varies according to one's station in life and stage of development. These approaches often connected ethical value to ultimate metaphysical questions about the nature of reality and human destiny, suggesting that moral and spiritual concerns cannot be separated. The formal emergence of axiology as a distinct philosophical discipline occurred during the late 19th century, as philosophers sought more systematic approaches to value questions. Wilhelm Windelband, working within the German philosophical tradition, coined the term axiology in 1883 and defined it as the systematic study of value judgments and their logical structure. His work attempted to establish value theory as a rigorous philosophical subdiscipline with its own methods and theoretical frameworks. Franz Brentano made crucial contributions through his analysis of intentionality, the directedness of mental states toward objects. Brentano argued that value judgments are always intentional, always directed toward particular objects or states of affairs, and cannot be understood in isolation from their targets. This insight connected value theory to broader questions in philosophy of mind and phenomenology, suggesting that understanding valuation requires careful analysis of consciousness itself. Alexius Meinong further developed these phenomenological insights while defending theories about the objectivity of value. Meinong argued that values possess a distinctive form of objectivity that differs from both physical objects and purely subjective experiences. His work attempted to navigate between naive realism about values and complete relativism, proposing that values have objective features while remaining dependent on valuing subjects. Contemporary philosophical analysis has revealed several fundamental distinctions that illuminate the complex structure of value itself. The distinction between inherent and constructed value separates those values that might exist independently of human recognition from those created through human judgment and social agreement. This distinction raises profound metaphysical questions about the nature of reality and our place within it. If some values are inherent features of the world, this suggests that moral and aesthetic judgments can be objectively correct or incorrect. If all values are constructed through human activity, this implies a more creative and potentially relativistic understanding of valuation. The debate over inherent versus constructed value connects to broader philosophical discussions about moral realism and anti-realism. Moral realists argue that at least some moral facts exist independently of human beliefs about them, while anti-realists contend that moral judgments express attitudes, emotions, or cultural agreements rather than objective truths. This debate has significant implications for how we understand moral disagreement, moral progress, and the possibility of moral knowledge. The distinction between objective and subjective value approaches these issues from a slightly different angle, focusing on the epistemological question of how we can know about values, rather than the metaphysical question of their mode of existence. Objective values would be discoverable through reason, empirical investigation, or some combination of both, while subjective values depend on individual or cultural perspectives that cannot be validated through universal methods. This distinction relates to fundamental questions about the nature of practical reason and the possibility of rational discourse about values. Beyond these metaphysical and epistemological issues, philosophers have devoted considerable attention to value as it manifests in lived experience. This phenomenological approach brackets questions about the ultimate metaphysical status of values to focus on how they appear in consciousness and shape human action. From this perspective, values are neither simply objective features of the world nor merely subjective projections, but rather emergent properties of the interaction between valuing subjects and their environments. The experiential approach to value has revealed the embodied and contextual nature of valuation. Our encounters with valuable objects or situations involve not just intellectual recognition, but full-bodied responses that engage emotion, perception, and action. A sunset strikes us as beautiful not merely because we judge it so, but because it evokes complex responses that integrate sensory appreciation, emotional resonance, and perhaps spiritual or existential reflection. Similarly, moral values often manifest not as abstract principles, but as felt responses to particular situations that call for action or judgment. Philosophical analysis has identified several important categories of value that help illuminate the complexity of axiological phenomena. Intrinsic value belongs to entities that are valuable in themselves, independently of their consequences, relationships, or utility for other purposes. Many philosophers argue that conscious experiences, human life, or perhaps all sentient life, possesses intrinsic value that provides the foundation for moral obligations and rights. The concept of intrinsic value plays a crucial role in debates about environmental ethics, animal rights, and human dignity. However, the notion of intrinsic value faces significant philosophical challenges. Critics question whether any values are truly intrinsic, arguing that all value judgments ultimately depend on the existence of valuing subjects and their particular perspectives. This critique suggests that what appears to be intrinsic value might actually be a special case of relational value. value that emerges from the relationship between conscious beings and their objects of concern. The debate over intrinsic value connects to fundamental questions about consciousness, subjectivity, and the possibility of objective moral truths. Instrumental value derives from the usefulness of objects, actions, or states of affairs in achieving other goals or purposes. Tools, money, knowledge, and many human activities possess primarily instrumental value. Understanding instrumental value requires analyzing complex chains of means and ends, as what appears instrumentally valuable at one level may ultimately serve intrinsically valuable ends. The analysis of instrumental value connects to practical reasoning about efficiency, effectiveness, and the rational organization of human activity. The relationship between intrinsic and instrumental value raises important questions about the structure of rational choice and moral reasoning. Some philosophers argue that instrumental reasoning requires ultimate ends that are valued for their own sake, while others suggest that the distinction between intrinsic and instrumental value may be less sharp than commonly assumed. These debates have significant implications for economic theory, political philosophy, and personal life planning. Relational value emerges from connections and relationships between entities rather than from the properties of individual objects. Friendship, family bonds, community membership, and cultural identity create values that cannot be reduced to individual properties or simple aggregations of individual goods. Relational values highlight the fundamentally social nature of human life and challenge purely individualistic approaches to value theory. The analysis of relational value has become increasingly important in contemporary philosophy, as scholars recognize the limitations of traditional approaches that focus primarily on individual agents and their properties. Environmental philosophers emphasize our relationships with natural systems, feminist philosophers highlight the importance of care and connection in moral life, and communitarian thinkers argue for the priority of social relationships in understanding human identity and value. Comparative value emerges through the assessment of relative worth between alternatives. Market prices, aesthetic rankings, moral priorities, and practical choices all involve comparative judgments that depend on available alternatives and contextual factors. Comparative values shift as circumstances change, raising important questions about the stability and consistency of value judgments over time. The study of comparative value connects to decision theory, economics, and the practical challenges of choice in complex environments. How should we weigh competing values when they conflict? Can different types of value be meaningfully compared? These questions become especially pressing in policy contexts where decision-makers must navigate competing claims and limited resources. The ethical branch of axiology encompasses several distinct but interrelated subdisciplines that illuminate different aspects of moral value. Normative ethics develops principles and frameworks for determining right action, addressing practical questions about how we should live and what we owe to others. This field has generated three major theoretical traditions that continue to influence contemporary moral philosophy. Consequentialism judges actions, rules, or character traits by their outcomes, typically seeking to maximize overall good or minimize harm across all affected parties. Utilitarianism represents the most influential consequentialist theory, arguing that we should act to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Classical utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill developed sophisticated accounts of how to measure and compare different types of pleasure and pain, while contemporary preference utilitarians focus on satisfying people's informed preferences rather than maximizing specific mental states. Consequentialism appeals to many people because of its apparent simplicity and its focus on results rather than motives or abstract principles. However, the theory faces significant challenges from cases where maximizing overall utility seems to require actions that violate individual rights or common moral intuitions. Critics argue that consequentialism can justify terrible actions if they produce sufficiently good results, and that the theory's demanding requirements for impartial concern may conflict with special obligations to family, friends, and community members. Deontological ethics emphasizes duties, rights, and the inherent rightness or wrongness of actions independently of their consequences. Immanuel Kant developed the most influential deontological theory, arguing that moral principles must be universalizable and that rational beings deserve respect as ends in themselves rather than merely as means to other purposes. Kantian ethics generates strong prohibitions against lying, promise-breaking, and treating people merely as tools for achieving other goals. Deontological approaches appeal to those who believe that some actions are simply wrong regardless of their consequences, and that morality involves more than maximizing good outcomes. However, deontological theories face challenges in specifying the content of our duties and in addressing conflicts between different moral obligations. Critics also argue that complete disregard for consequences can lead to rigid and counterintuitive moral judgments. Virtue ethics focuses on character traits and moral excellence rather than specific actions or consequences. This approach, traceable to Aristotle, asks what kind of person one should be rather than what specific actions to perform in particular situations. Virtue ethicists emphasize the importance of moral education, role models, and the cultivation of excellences like courage, compassion, honesty, and practical wisdom. Contemporary virtue ethics has experienced significant revival as philosophers seek alternatives to the limitations of both consequentialist and deontological approaches. Virtue theory offers resources for understanding moral psychology, the role of emotion in ethical life, and the importance of character development. However, critics argue that virtue ethics provides insufficient guidance for action, and that virtues themselves require grounding in more fundamental moral principles. Metaethics investigates the nature and status of moral judgments themselves, asking whether moral statements can be true or false, and what kinds of properties moral terms refer to. This field addresses fundamental questions about moral epistemology, moral psychology, and the relationship between moral and natural properties. Moral realism claims that moral statements can be objectively true or false, and that moral properties exist independently of human beliefs about them. Realists argue that moral disagreement makes sense only if there are objective moral facts about which people can be mistaken, and that moral progress requires the discovery of moral truths rather than simply changes in attitude or preference. Anti-realist positions deny the existence of objective moral facts while offering various alternative accounts of moral discourse. Emotivism suggests that moral judgments express attitudes or emotions rather than beliefs, while expressivism develops sophisticated accounts of how moral language functions to coordinate social life and practical reasoning. Error theory argues that moral judgments attempt to refer to objective moral facts but fail because no such facts exist. Applied ethics addresses moral questions that arise in specific practical domains, bringing theoretical insights to bear on concrete problems in medicine, business, environmental policy, and other areas of human activity. Bioethics examines questions about beginning and end-of-life care, research ethics, and the distribution of medical resources. Environmental ethics considers our obligations to future generations, non-human animals, and natural systems. Business ethics investigates questions about corporate responsibility, fair trade, and the moral limits of market relationships. The development of applied ethics reflects both the practical importance of moral reasoning in professional contexts and the recognition that abstract theoretical work must engage with the complexities of real-world decision-making. Applied ethics has also influenced theoretical work by generating new insights about moral reasoning, the role of expertise in ethical judgment, and the relationship between individual and institutional moral responsibility. Aesthetic theory addresses fundamental questions about beauty, art, and aesthetic experience that have engaged philosophers since ancient times. What makes objects or experiences beautiful? Are aesthetic judgments objective or subjective? How do cultural contexts influence aesthetic appreciation? What is the relationship between artistic value and broader human values? These questions connect to broader philosophical issues about perception, emotion, cultural meaning, and the nature of human experience itself. The analysis of aesthetic experience reveals complex interactions between sensory reception, imaginative elaboration, and emotional response. When we encounter a beautiful natural scene or a powerful work of art, our response involves immediate sensory engagement with colors, forms, sounds, or textures. However, aesthetic appreciation typically extends beyond simple sensory reception to include imaginative activity that interprets, elaborates, and connects sensory input to broader meanings and associations. Aesthetic experience also involves emotional dimensions that distinguish it from purely intellectual or practical engagement with objects. Beautiful objects evoke feelings of pleasure, admiration, or wonder that seem integral to aesthetic value rather than merely contingent psychological accompaniments. However, aesthetic emotions can also include more complex responses like melancholy, awe, or even productive discomfort that challenges our existing perspectives and assumptions. The cultural dimensions of aesthetic value raise important questions about universality and relativity in aesthetic judgment. Cross-cultural studies reveal both striking commonalities and significant differences in aesthetic preference and evaluation. Some features, such as symmetry, proportion, and certain natural scenes, appear to evoke positive aesthetic responses across many different cultural contexts. However, the interpretation and significance of aesthetic objects varies dramatically across cultures, suggesting that aesthetic value involves both universal and culturally specific components. Historical analysis reveals that aesthetic values change over time as artistic movements develop new forms of expression and challenge existing norms. The emergence of abstract art, atonal music, and experimental literature demonstrates that aesthetic categories are not fixed, but evolve through creative innovation and critical reflection. Understanding this historical dimension helps illuminate the dynamic relationship between artistic creation, critical interpretation, and public reception that shapes aesthetic culture. Contemporary aesthetic theory has expanded beyond traditional focus on beauty and fine art to include popular culture, everyday aesthetics, and environmental appreciation. This expansion recognizes that aesthetic value permeates many aspects of human life, and that understanding aesthetic experience requires attention to diverse contexts and forms of appreciation. The aesthetics of food, fashion, urban design, and digital media have become legitimate subjects of philosophical investigation. The relationship between aesthetic and moral values remains a contested area in contemporary theory. Some philosophers argue for strong connections between aesthetic and ethical judgment, suggesting that experiences of beauty cultivate moral sensitivity, or that ethical criticism of art is legitimate and important. Others defend the autonomy of aesthetic value, arguing that attempts to subordinate art to moral or political purposes misunderstand the distinctive character of aesthetic experience. The study of value has a rich and complex history, and it has been shaped by the ideas and debates of many great philosophers. In this lecture, we will examine the ancient foundations of value theory, the developments of the Enlightenment, and the modern reinterpretations of value. First, let us consider the ancient foundations of value theory. The ancient Greeks, particularly Plato and Aristotle, established early value frameworks that continue to influence our understanding of value today. Plato's theory of forms, or objective universals, is a central aspect of his value theory. According to Plato, there are eternal and unchanging forms or ideas that exist independently of the physical world. These forms are the source of our recognition of recurrent properties in the flux of appearance. For example, the form of beauty is the eternal and unchanging essence of beauty, and our perception of beauty in the physical world is a participation in this form. Aristotle, on the other hand, developed a hierarchical noetic structure that connected worth to concepts of beauty, truth, and goodness. He argued that there is a hierarchy of values, with the highest value being the ultimate good, which is the realization of human potential. Aristotle's value theory is closely related to his concept of eudaimonia, or human flourishing. He believed that the ultimate goal of human life is to achieve eudaimonia, and that this goal is achieved through the cultivation of virtues and the pursuit of wisdom. The ancient Greeks also made significant contributions to the study of aesthetics. Plato's theory of forms, for example, has a direct influence on the development of aesthetic theory. He argued that the beauty of art is a participation in the eternal and unchanging form of beauty. This idea has been influential in the development of aesthetic theory, particularly in the work of Kant and Hegel. Next, let us consider the developments of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a period of intellectual and philosophical activity that emphasized reason, science, and individualism. During this period, philosophers such as Kant, Hume, and Mill made significant contributions to the study of value. Kant, for example, argued that moral values are objective and universal. He believed that there are moral laws that are independent of human judgment and that these laws are discoverable through reason. Kant's moral philosophy is closely related to his concept of the categorical imperative, which is a principle that guides our moral judgments and actions. Hume, on the other hand, argued that moral values are subjective and relative. He believed that our moral judgments are based on our emotions and feelings, and that there are no objective moral facts. Hume's moral philosophy is closely related to his concept of the sentiment of approbation and disapprobation, which are the emotions that guide our moral judgments. Mill, a contemporary of Kant and Hume, made significant contributions to the study of value. He argued that the greatest good for the greatest number is the ultimate goal of moral action. Mill's utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, which argues that the moral worth of an action is determined by its consequences. Mill's value theory is closely related to his concept of the greatest happiness principle, which is the principle that guides our moral judgments and actions. Finally, let us consider the modern reinterpretations of value. In the modern period, philosophers such as Nietzsche, Dewey, and More made significant contributions to the study of value. They questioned traditional hierarchies and value assumptions and sought to reconceptualize value in new and innovative ways. Nietzsche, for example, argued that traditional moral values are based on a false and oppressive hierarchy of values. He believed that the traditional values of morality and religion are a form of slave morality, which is a morality that is based on the values of the weak and the oppressed. Nietzsche's value theory is closely related to his concept of the Übermensch, or the Superman, who is a being who has transcended traditional moral values and who has created his own values. Dewey, on the other hand, argued that value is a product of human experience and interaction. He believed that value is created through the process of inquiry and reflection, and that it is a dynamic and evolving process. Dewey's value theory is closely related to his concept of the transactional view of experience, which is the idea that experience is a dynamic and interactive process that is shaped by our interactions with the world. More, a contemporary of Dewey, made significant contributions to the study of value. He argued that there are objective and mind-independent values, and that these values are discoverable through intuition. More's value theory is closely related to his concept of the naturalistic fallacy, which is the idea that we cannot derive moral values from natural facts. The historical philosophical perspectives on value are a rich and complex tapestry of ideas and debates. From the ancient Greeks to the modern philosophers, the study of value has been shaped by the ideas and debates of many great philosophers. Contemporary axiology employs several distinct methodological approaches that reflect different assumptions about the nature of value and appropriate methods for its investigation. The phenomenological approach, developed by Edmund Husserl and refined by thinkers like Martin Heidegger and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, investigates value as it appears in conscious experience without making assumptions about its ultimate metaphysical status. Phenomenological analysis employs the method of epoche, the systematic bracketing of existence assumptions, to focus on the essential structures of value experience. This approach reveals the intentional character of value consciousness, the temporal dimensions of aesthetic and moral response, and the embodied nature of valuation. Phenomenology has illuminated how values appear to consciousness as calling for response, as requiring acknowledgement or action, rather than simply as objects of detached contemplation. The existentialist approach, exemplified by thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, emphasizes human freedom and responsibility in creating values through authentic choice and action. Existentialists argue that humans are condemned to be free in a world lacking inherent meaning or value, and that authentic existence requires taking responsibility for one's choices without appeal to external authorities or predetermined essences. Existentialism has contributed insights about the relationship between individual authenticity and social responsibility, the role of anxiety and other emotions in moral life, and the importance of concrete situation and choice in ethical reasoning. However, critics argue that existentialism's emphasis on individual creation of values may lead to arbitrary subjectivism, and that its rejection of universal moral principles undermines the possibility of moral criticism and social reform. The pragmatic approach, developed by American philosophers like William James and John Dewey, focuses on values' practical dimensions and consequences rather than its metaphysical foundations. Pragmatists treat value judgments as hypotheses to be tested through experience and practical outcomes, emphasizing the experimental and fallibilistic character of moral reasoning. Dewey's instrumentalist approach views values as tools for organizing experience and coordinating social action rather than as representations of independent moral facts. This perspective emphasizes the democratic and participatory dimensions of value inquiry, arguing that moral problems are best addressed through collective investigation and experimentation rather than appeal to fixed principles or authorities. Critical theory approaches value questions through analysis of power relationships, ideological distortion, and the social conditions that shape moral and aesthetic judgment. Thinkers in this tradition examine how dominant groups use value discourse to maintain power and privilege, and how apparently neutral value claims may conceal particular interests and perspectives. The Frankfurt School, including figures like Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse, developed sophisticated critiques of modern industrial society that connected aesthetic theory to social criticism. Their work revealed how cultural production serves ideological functions and how the commodification of aesthetic experience undermines its critical and emancipatory potential. Contemporary critical theorists continue to examine how race, gender, class, and other social categories shape both the formation of values and access to goods that societies value. This work has illuminated previously invisible dimensions of moral and aesthetic life while challenging traditional philosophical approaches that abstract from social context and power relations. Epistemology is the study of knowledge and justified belief, and it is closely related to the study of value. In this lecture, we will examine how our knowledge acquisition, cognitive assessment, and value judgment formation are connected to the study of value. First, let us consider the concept of knowledge acquisition. Knowledge acquisition refers to the process by which we gather information and form beliefs. Our epistemic frameworks, which are our beliefs and assumptions about the world, filter our experience and shape what we value. For example, if we believe that certain objects are valuable, we will be more likely to seek out and appreciate those objects. Conversely, if we believe that certain objects are not valuable, we will be less likely to seek them out or appreciate them. The concept of knowledge acquisition is closely related to the idea of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias refers to the systematic errors in our thinking that can lead us to make poor decisions and form inaccurate beliefs. For example, confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, while ignoring or rejecting information that contradicts them. Cognitive biases can shape our value judgments and our understanding of the world. Next, let us consider the concept of cognitive assessment. Cognitive assessment refers to the mental processes by which we evaluate the worth of objects, actions, and beliefs. These processes may operate consciously or unconsciously, and they may be guided by rational criteria or intuitive feelings. For example, when we evaluate the value of a piece of art, we may consider its aesthetic qualities, its historical significance, or its emotional impact. These evaluations may be guided by rational criteria, such as the artist's reputation or the object's rarity, or by intuitive feelings, such as the beauty or the emotional resonance of the object. The concept of cognitive assessment is closely related to the idea of moral intuition. Moral intuition is the idea that we have immediate and non-rational feelings of rightness or wrongness about certain actions or objects. Moral intuitions can shape our value judgments and our understanding of the world. For example, we may have an intuitive feeling that certain actions are wrong, even if we cannot rationally explain why. Finally, let us consider the concept of value judgment formation. Value judgment formation refers to the process by which we combine knowledge and perception to create value judgments. These judgments reflect both rational and intuitive processes. For example, when we evaluate the value of a piece of art, we may consider its aesthetic qualities, its historical significance, and its emotional impact. These evaluations may be guided by rational criteria, such as the artist's reputation or the object's rarity, or by intuitive feelings, such as the beauty or the emotional resonance of the object. The concept of value judgment formation is closely related to the idea of moral realism. Moral realism is the view that there are objective moral facts that exist independently of human judgment. Moral realists argue that our value judgments are based on our knowledge of these objective moral facts. For example, they may argue that certain actions are objectively wrong because they violate certain moral principles, such as the principle of non-maleficence or the principle of justice. However, the concept of value judgment formation is not without its critics. Some philosophers argue that value judgments are subjective and relative, and that they are not based on objective moral facts. They argue that our value judgments are shaped by our cultural and individual experiences, and that they are not based on any objective moral principles. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the epistemological connections between knowledge and value are a rich and complex field of study. Our knowledge acquisition, cognitive assessment, and value judgment formation shape our understanding of the world and our value judgments. It is essential to explore the psychological dimensions of value, an intricate landscape for understanding how cognitive and emotional processes shape our evaluations and perceptions of worth. In today's lecture, we will scrutinize the mechanisms of cognitive value, the foundations of emotion, and the dynamic interplay between individual and collective value systems. To commence our discussion, let us first examine the concept of cognitive value mechanisms. These mechanisms refer to the mental frameworks through which we interpret sensory information and assess worth. They function along both conscious and unconscious pathways. Take, for instance, the experience of viewing a piece of art. Our cognitive value mechanisms engage to process visual stimuli and guide us in determining its aesthetic value. This evaluative process may involve deliberate considerations, such as the artist's reputation or the object's rarity, as well as instinctual responses driven by immediate sensations of beauty or emotional resonance. This notion of cognitive value mechanisms is closely linked to the concept of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias encompasses the systematic deviations in our thinking that can lead to flawed decisions and erroneous beliefs. For example, confirmation bias, an inclination to seek and interpret information that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs, can significantly influence our value assessments. By ignoring or dismissing contradictory information, we unknowingly distort our understanding of the world and of the values we embrace. Next, we turn our attention to the emotional foundations of value. These foundations denote the immediate emotional responses that inform and enrich our sense of worth. Such emotional signals frequently emerge prior to rational evaluation and can profoundly influence our value judgments. For instance, when we witness a breathtaking sunset, we are often enveloped in immediate feelings of joy and appreciation, which naturally shape our assessment of its beauty. This connection between emotional foundations and moral intuition is particularly salient. Moral intuition posits that we experience instinctive feelings regarding the rightness or wrongness of particular actions or objects, thereby guiding our value perceptions. Moreover, the concept of affect plays a crucial role in this discussion. Affect encompasses the emotional responses elicited by stimuli, shaping our judgments and perceptions of value. Whether these affective responses are conscious or unconscious, their implications can be significant. A positive affect may enhance our appreciation for an object, whereas a negative affect can lead to a depreciation of its value. Now, let us consider the interplay between individual and collective value systems. Personal values often come into contact with societal norms, creating a dynamic tension between unique perspectives and shared standards. For example, an individual may prioritize honesty and integrity, while their cultural or social group might emphasize loyalty and obedience. This tension can lead to conflicts, but it can also be a source of creativity and innovation, driving discussions that challenge conventional norms. This exploration of individual versus collective value systems aligns closely with the tenets of cultural relativism, which asserts that moral values are inherently tied to cultural contexts and historical moments. According to this view, there are no absolute moral truths, as values are shaped by specific cultural and temporal factors. While cultural relativism offers a lens through which to understand diverse moral frameworks, it also presents risks of moral nihilism, the idea that no objective moral values exist. The psychological dimensions of value comprise a rich and complex field that intertwines cognitive mechanisms, emotional underpinnings, and the dynamic relationship between individual and collective value systems. Let us now turn our attention to the concept of cross-cultural value analysis. Cross-cultural value analysis is the study of how values are understood and evaluated across different cultures and societies. In this lecture, we will examine the concepts of cultural relativism, universal human values, and intercultural dialogue. First, let us consider the concept of cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the thesis that different cultures or societies have different moral values, and that these values are shaped by cultural and historical factors. Cultural relativism argues that there are no objective moral facts, and that moral values are relative to culture and time. For example, some cultures may value honesty and integrity highly, while others may value loyalty and obedience more highly. The concept of cultural relativism is closely related to the idea of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity refers to the variety of cultures and societies that exist in the world. Cultural diversity can lead to a form of moral relativism, which assumes that there are no objective moral values. However, cultural diversity can also lead to a form of moral pluralism, which assumes that there are many different moral values and that these values are not necessarily in conflict with each other. Next, let us consider the concept of universal human values. Universal human values are values that appear across all cultures and societies. These values are often considered to be fundamental to human nature and to be essential for the well-being of individuals and communities. For example, fairness and reciprocity are often considered to be universal human values. These values are often considered to be essential for the functioning of societies and for the well-being of individuals. The concept of universal human values is closely related to the idea of human rights. Human rights are rights that are considered to be universal and inalienable. They are rights that are essential for the well-being of individuals and that are recognized by all cultures and societies. For example, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to equality are often considered to be universal human rights. Now let us consider the concept of intercultural dialogue. Intercultural dialogue refers to the interaction and exchange of values between different cultures and societies. Intercultural dialogue can lead to the creation of new hybrid value frameworks, which are value systems that combine elements from different cultures and societies. For example, globalization has led to the exchange of values between different cultures and societies, and this exchange has led to the creation of new hybrid value frameworks. The concept of intercultural dialogue is closely related to the idea of cultural exchange. Cultural exchange refers to the exchange of cultural practices, beliefs, and values between different cultures and societies. Cultural exchange can lead to the creation of new hybrid value frameworks, which are value systems that combine elements from different cultures and societies. For example, the exchange of cultural practices between different cultures and societies has led to the creation of new hybrid value frameworks. The concept of cross-cultural value analysis is a rich and complex field of study. The concepts of cultural relativism, universal human values, and intercultural dialogue shape our understanding and evaluation of value across different cultures and societies. Axiological methodology encompasses the diverse methods and approaches employed to study and comprehend the intricate nature of value. In this lecture, we will explore 4 distinct methodologies: the analytical approach, the phenomenological approach, the logical formalism approach, and the comparative study approach. To begin, let us delve into the analytical approach. This method aims to clarify and define the terms and concepts associated with value. Through rigorous conceptual analysis, the analytical approach strives to elucidate and establish the precise meanings of value-related terms. Its primary focus is on achieving clarity and precision in our understanding of value, thus ensuring that discussions surrounding value are grounded in well-defined concepts. The analytical approach closely aligns with the practice of conceptual analysis, which entails the investigation of concepts and terminology to uncover their meanings. By employing logical reasoning and structured argumentation, this approach seeks to shed light on the nuances and complexities inherent in value terms, facilitating a deeper understanding of their implications. Next, we turn our attention to the phenomenological approach. This methodology seeks to capture and articulate the lived experiences of value, emphasizing the subjective dimensions of valuation. By employing experiential description, the phenomenological approach endeavors to provide rich accounts of how individuals engage with and understand value in their everyday lives. Its primary focus is on illuminating the first-person perspective of value as experienced by individuals in different contexts. This approach is rooted in the discipline of phenomenology, which philosophically investigates the structures of consciousness and experience. By applying phenomenological principles to the study of value, this methodology seeks to unveil the intricacies of how value is perceived, felt, and understood within the fabric of lived experience. Now let us consider the logical formalism approach. This methodology focuses on analyzing and elucidating the relationships between values. Through the use of symbolic reasoning and the establishment of value relation structures, the logical formalism approach aims to dissect and understand the connections that exist between various value systems. Its primary emphasis is on the relational dynamics within the realm of value, facilitating a structured understanding of how different values interrelate. This approach is akin to the broader concept of logical formalism, which investigates the relationships between concepts and terms through symbolic logic. By applying logical formalism to value relations, this methodology seeks to clarify the criteria by which values can be compared and evaluated within coherent frameworks. Finally, we arrive at the comparative study approach. This methodology is dedicated to examining and contrasting value systems across diverse cultures and societies. Through cross-cultural analysis, it seeks to uncover the commonalities and differences among various value systems, offering insights into how values are shaped by cultural contexts and historical circumstances. The primary focus of this approach is to facilitate a nuanced understanding of values as they manifest in different cultural settings. This approach is closely aligned with the concept of cross-cultural comparison, which involves systematic examination and evaluation of value systems across global traditions. By utilizing this methodology, researchers can illuminate the unique and shared aspects of value, fostering appreciation for the richness of human experience. The concept of axiological methodology represents a vibrant and multifaceted field of study. The analytical approach, the phenomenological approach, the logical formalism approach, and the comparative study approach each contribute unique perspectives and tools for understanding value. The 21st century has generated unprecedented challenges for value theory as technological innovation, global interconnection, and environmental crisis transform the contexts within which human beings make value judgments. Digital technologies create new forms of value while challenging traditional frameworks for understanding worth and significance. The emergence of information as a valuable commodity raises questions about privacy, ownership, and the commodification of personal data that were inconceivable to previous generations. Social media platforms create new forms of social value based on attention, influence, and network effects that challenge traditional assumptions about merit, achievement, and social recognition. Artificial intelligence systems increasingly mediate human value judgments in areas ranging from financial decisions to aesthetic recommendations, raising questions about algorithmic bias, transparency, and human agency. Virtual and augmented reality technologies create immersive experiences that blur traditional distinctions between real and simulated environments. These developments challenge philosophical assumptions about the relationship between aesthetic value and physical reality, and raise new questions about the significance of virtual relationships, achievements, and experiences. Globalization has intensified contact between different cultural value systems while creating new forms of economic and political interdependence. This increased connectivity creates both opportunities for mutual learning and understanding, and sources of conflict as different values come into tension. Global economic integration often involves the imposition of particular value frameworks, typically those associated with market capitalism and liberal democracy, on societies with different traditional values and social arrangements. The emergence of hybrid value systems through cross-cultural contact and exchange represents both creative synthesis and potential loss of distinctive cultural perspectives. Understanding how to evaluate these developments requires sophisticated analysis of cultural change, power relations, and the conditions under which intercultural dialogue can be genuinely respectful and mutually enriching. Environmental crisis poses fundamental challenges to anthropocentric value systems that have dominated Western thought since the Enlightenment. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion force reconsideration of assumptions about economic growth, technological progress, and human relationships with natural systems. Environmental philosophers have developed new approaches to value that extend moral consideration to non-human animals, ecosystems, and future generations. These approaches challenge traditional assumptions about the scope of moral concern and require new frameworks for thinking about intergenerational justice, the rights of nature, and sustainable development. The emergence of the Anthropocene as a geological epoch defined by human influence on Earth systems represents both a scientific and philosophical watershed that requires fundamental reconsideration of human values and their place in natural history. This development connects contemporary environmental challenges to broader questions about human nature, technological capability, and moral responsibility on a planetary scale. The interdisciplinary connections between axiology and other fields of study offer different perspectives on the nature of value and the ways in which it is understood and evaluated. In this lecture, we will examine the interdisciplinary connections between axiology and sociology, economics, and anthropology. First, let us consider the interdisciplinary connection between axiology and sociology. Sociology is the study of how collective values form and function within social structures and institutions. Sociologists examine how values are transmitted and maintained within social groups and how they shape social behavior and social change. For example, sociologists may study how religious values shape social behavior and social institutions, or how cultural values shape social norms and social practices. The interdisciplinary connection between axiology and sociology is closely related to the idea of social construction. Social construction is the idea that social phenomena, including values, are created and maintained through social practices and institutions. Sociologists argue that values are not objective and universal, but rather are created and maintained through social interaction and cultural practices. Next, let us consider the interdisciplinary connection between axiology and economics. Economics is the study of how value manifests in resource allocation and utility maximization decisions. Economists examine how individuals and societies allocate resources and make decisions based on their values and preferences. For example, economists may study how individuals make decisions about consumption and production based on their values and preferences, or how societies allocate resources based on their values and preferences. The interdisciplinary connection between axiology and economics is closely related to the idea of utility. Utility is the idea that individuals and societies make decisions based on their preferences and values. Economists argue that individuals and societies maximize their utility by making decisions that satisfy their preferences and values. The study of utility is a central theme in the contemporary study of economics, and it is closely related to the study of value. Now, let us consider the interdisciplinary connection between axiology and anthropology. Anthropology is the study of diverse cultural expressions of value across human societies. Anthropologists examine how values are expressed and understood in different cultures and societies. For example, anthropologists may study how values are expressed in art, religion, and social practices, or how values are understood and evaluated in different cultural contexts. The interdisciplinary connection between axiology and anthropology is closely related to the idea of cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the thesis that different cultures or societies have different moral values, and that these values are shaped by cultural and historical factors. Anthropologists argue that values are not objective and universal, but rather are created and maintained through social interaction and cultural practices. The interdisciplinary connections between axiology and other fields of study offer different perspectives on the nature of value and the ways in which it is understood and evaluated. The concepts of social construction, utility, and cultural relativism shape our understanding and evaluation of value in the contemporary world. As we continue our exploration of axiology, let us keep these interdisciplinary connections in mind and strive to understand the fundamental nature of value in all its complexity. Critical theory represents a philosophical and social movement aimed at unpacking and challenging the social and political structures that shape our everyday lives. In this lecture, we will explore the intersections of critical theory with axiology, focusing our attention on three key concepts: power analysis, construction processes, and hierarchy deconstruction. To begin, let us consider the concept of power analysis. This entails an examination of how value systems both reflect and reinforce existing social hierarchies. Critical theorists assert that value systems are neither neutral nor objective. Instead, they are inextricably intertwined with the power dynamics prevalent within society. These systems often echo the interests and privileges of dominant groups, thereby serving to sustain and perpetuate existing inequalities. Power analysis is closely connected to the notion of ideology. Ideology refers to the collection of beliefs and values that shape our worldview and our understanding of our place within it. Critical theorists contend that ideologies are also not neutral. They are shaped by societal power dynamics and often function to legitimize the interests of those in control. In this context, ideologies reinforce social hierarchies, making them appear both natural and inevitable. Next, we turn our attention to the concept of construction processes. This concept pertains to the ways in which societies create and legitimize their value frameworks. Critical theorists argue that these frameworks are neither objective nor universal. Rather, they are constructed and maintained through institutional practices and social interactions. In this view, values arise from social contexts and are shaped by the prevailing power structures, serving to uphold the privileges of dominant societal groups. The idea of construction processes is closely aligned with the concept of social construction. Social construction posits that social phenomena, including values, come into being through collective practices and cultural interactions. Critical theorists argue that rather than being fixed or predetermined, values evolve and are sustained through the interplay of social dynamics, often reflecting the interests of those in power. Now, Let us explore the concept of hierarchy deconstruction. Hierarchy deconstruction involves scrutinizing and challenging established value rankings and their underlying justifications. Critical theorists argue that these rankings are not objective. They are shaped by societal power dynamics and often serve to legitimize the privileges of the dominant groups. Thus, value hierarchies can perpetuate systems of oppression and inequality. Hierarchical deconstruction is inherently tied to the process of deconstruction itself, challenging and questioning the assumptions and hierarchies that shape our understanding of reality. Critical theorists assert that deconstruction is a vital method for interrogating power dynamics. It provides a means to expose the assumptions that sustain existing value frameworks, facilitating the emergence of new paradigms that prioritize justice and equity. The intersections of critical theory with axiology yield profound insights into the nature of value and its evaluative processes. Concepts such as power analysis, construction processes, and hierarchy deconstruction enable us to critically examine how value is understood and assessed within contemporary society. Axiological analysis provides valuable resources for addressing practical challenges in leadership, education, policy development, and personal life. In organizational contexts, leaders must navigate competing values and stakeholder interests while maintaining coherent vision and ethical integrity. Understanding different types of value, intrinsic, instrumental, relational, and comparative, helps leaders analyze complex situations and make decisions that balance competing claims and interests. Value-based leadership approaches emphasize the importance of clarifying fundamental commitments and ensuring that organizational practices align with stated values. This requires ongoing dialogue about priorities, regular assessment of outcomes against values, and willingness to modify practices when they conflict with deeper commitments. Axiological analysis can help leaders identify hidden assumptions, recognize value conflicts, and develop more inclusive decision-making processes. Educational applications of value theory include curriculum development, character education, and critical thinking instruction. Understanding different approaches to moral and aesthetic education helps educators balance competing goals such as cultural transmission, critical analysis, and creative expression. Value theory also provides frameworks for addressing controversial topics and helping students develop capacities for thoughtful moral and aesthetic judgment. The development of practical wisdom, the ability to discern appropriate action in particular contexts, requires integration of theoretical understanding with experiential learning and reflective practice. Educational programs that incorporate axiological insights can help students develop not just knowledge about values, but also capacities for value reasoning and judgment that serve them throughout their lives. Policy development involves complex negotiations between competing values and interests that require sophisticated understanding of value theory and its practical implications. Effective policy analysis must consider not just economic efficiency, but also questions of justice, cultural sensitivity, environmental sustainability, and democratic participation. Cost-benefit analysis and other quantitative policy tools often embody particular value assumptions that may not be explicitly recognized or defended. Axiological analysis can help policymakers identify these assumptions, consider alternative approaches, and develop more inclusive processes for weighing competing considerations. In personal life, axiological reflection can contribute to more thoughtful life planning, better relationship navigation, and deeper sense of meaning and purpose. Understanding one's own values and their relationships to others' values can improve communication, reduce conflict, and facilitate collaborative problem-solving. The process of values clarification, identifying and prioritizing one's most fundamental commitments, provides direction for major life decisions while remaining open to growth and change over time. This requires balance between commitment and flexibility, between individual authenticity and social responsibility, between present satisfaction and long-term flourishing. The future of axiological inquiry will likely involve continued integration of traditional philosophical analysis with emerging empirical methods, expanded inclusion of global perspectives, and creative responses to technological and environmental challenges. Experimental philosophy has begun to investigate how people actually make value judgments through surveys, behavioral experiments, and cross-cultural studies that complement traditional conceptual analysis. These empirical investigations have revealed interesting patterns in moral and aesthetic judgment that both confirm and challenge philosophical theories. For example, Research on moral psychology has illuminated the role of emotion and intuition in moral judgment, while revealing cultural variations in moral reasoning that complicate claims about universal moral principles. Computational modeling and artificial intelligence provide new tools for testing theoretical predictions about value systems and their dynamics. Agent-based models can simulate interactions between individuals with different value commitments, revealing how value change occurs in social networks and how different institutional arrangements affect collective value outcomes. The development of machine learning systems that can recognize and respond to human values raises profound questions about the nature of value judgment itself. Can artificial systems genuinely understand values or merely simulate value-responsive behavior? What would it mean for an artificial system to have values of its own? These questions will become increasingly pressing as AI systems become more sophisticated and autonomous. Neuroscientific research on the biological basis of moral and aesthetic judgment provides new insights into the psychological mechanisms underlying value experience. Brain imaging studies reveal different neural networks associated with different types of moral reasoning, while research on aesthetic appreciation illuminates the relationship between sensory processing, emotional response, and evaluative judgment. However, the relationship between neuroscientific findings and philosophical conclusions about value remains complex and contested. The discovery of biological mechanisms underlying value judgment does not automatically resolve philosophical disputes about the objectivity, universality, or authority of particular value claims. Interdisciplinary collaboration between philosophy and other fields continues to enrich axiological inquiry while challenging traditional philosophical methods and assumptions. Work with anthropologists has revealed the diversity of human value systems while identifying possible universals. Collaboration with psychologists has illuminated the cognitive and emotional dimensions of value judgment, and engagement with economists has clarified the relationship between values and rational choice. Environmental and sustainability challenges will likely drive continued development of new approaches to value that can address questions about intergenerational justice, species preservation, and planetary boundaries. These challenges require integration of scientific understanding of Earth systems with philosophical reflection on human responsibility and the scope of moral concern. The emergence of global governance institutions and transnational social movements creates new contexts for axiological analysis that transcend traditional boundaries between cultures and nations. Understanding how to build consensus around shared values while respecting cultural diversity represents one of the great challenges for contemporary political philosophy and practical ethics. The philosophical implications of axiology present a rich and intricate web of inquiry, interwoven with connections to various other philosophical domains. In this lecture, we will explore three key concepts that arise from these implications: expanded human understanding, critical thinking development, and philosophical evolution. To begin with, let us consider the concept of expanded human understanding. Axiological inquiry serves to deepen our grasp of consciousness itself, illuminating how our perceptions of value shape our entire experience of reality. By examining the myriad ways in which individuals perceive and evaluate value, axiology allows us to delve into the essence of consciousness and to appreciate the profound influence it has on our interactions with the world around us. This concept of expanded human understanding is closely associated with the notion of empathy. Empathy is our capacity to understand and resonate with the feelings of others. Through axiological investigation, we foster our ability to embrace empathy across cultural and value divides. By exploring how different cultures prioritize and interpret various values, axiology enhances our appreciation for the rich tapestry of human experience and encourages a deeper understanding of diverse perspectives. Next, we focus on the idea of critical thinking development. Axiological analysis cultivates our capacity to question fundamental assumptions and confront deeply held beliefs. It promotes the development of metacognitive skills that empower us to reflect critically on our personal values and the beliefs that shape our actions. This rigorous examination, facilitated by axiology, enables us to strengthen our critical thinking abilities, prompting us to challenge assumptions and scrutinize the frameworks through which we evaluate value. The concept of critical thinking development is intimately linked to metacognition, which is the ability to think about one's own thinking processes. Axiological inquiry encourages the cultivation of these metacognitive skills, prompting individuals to engage in a more rigorous and systematic examination of their beliefs. Through this process, we can develop a more informed and reflective approach to our values and judgments, enriching our understanding of ourselves and the world. Finally, let us consider the notion of philosophical evolution. Axiology acts as a bridge between previously distinct philosophical domains, weaving together the threads of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. By exploring the ways in which value is understood and assessed, axiological study fosters insights that illuminate the interconnectedness of these various fields. This integration provides opportunities for innovative philosophical thought and for a more holistic grasp of our existence. The concept of philosophical evolution is closely tied to the idea of integration, which involves the synthesis of different philosophical domains. Axiological investigation creates pathways for the integration of metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, enriching our philosophical landscape and expanding the horizons of our understanding. As we bridge these domains, we unlock potential for new insights and perspectives that enhance our comprehension of complex philosophical questions. The philosophical implications of axiology represent a vibrant and multifaceted area of study. The concepts of expanded human understanding, critical thinking development, and philosophical evolution serve to shape our comprehension of value in profound ways. Axiology remains central to human flourishing because questions about value are inescapable dimensions of conscious existence. Every choice implies judgments about what matters. Every institution embodies particular priorities, and every life reflects commitments about ultimate significance and meaning. The field's enduring value lies not in providing final answers to these questions, but in developing sophisticated frameworks for thinking about them more clearly and comprehensively. The strength of contemporary axiological inquiry lies in its combination of theoretical rigor with practical relevance, its integration of diverse methodological approaches, and its engagement with both traditional wisdom and emerging challenges. As new problems arise, from artificial intelligence to climate change to global inequality, axiological analysis provides conceptual tools for navigating unprecedented moral and aesthetic territories. Understanding value theory enhances our capacity for reflective living by helping us examine our own value commitments and their implications more carefully. It promotes empathetic understanding by providing frameworks for appreciating different value perspectives and their cultural contexts. It supports democratic participation by contributing to more thoughtful public discourse about shared values and common purposes. And it facilitates personal growth by offering resources for developing more coherent and fulfilling approaches to life's persistent challenges. The future of axiological inquiry will undoubtedly involve continued dialogue between traditional philosophical analysis and emerging empirical methods, expanded inclusion of perspectives from diverse cultural traditions, and creative responses to technological and environmental developments that transform the conditions of human existence. Through this ongoing investigation, we can hope to develop wiser and more humane approaches to the fundamental question of what makes life worth living and how we can create conditions that allow all persons to flourish according to their deepest values and highest aspirations.